On today's episode, we are talking Silvopasture, mainly focusing on getting your tree started and off to a good start. So we'll get started with the Fast Five. What's your name?
My name is Austin Unruh.
And Austin, what's your business's name?
The name of the business is Trees for Graziers.
Well, that is really good because most of us here would say we're grazers.
Perfect.
And where are you located?
I'm in Morgantown, Pennsylvania. So if anyone's familiar, Lancaster County, a lot of Amish and conservative Mennonites in our area. We're in southeastern Pennsylvania, so about an hour from Philadelphia.
Now, is that the county where the raw milk fight was going on?
Yes, indeed. Yep.
Yes.
And in fact, the Amos Miller, his son, helped me out on some tree plantings a couple times.
Oh, yes.
Yep. So we have a couple of connections there.
Yeah, very good. And when did you get interested in Silvopasture?
So I got started in the broader scheme of agroforestry first, so planting trees in an agricultural context. I started planting trees along streams as a water quality practice back in 2017. And a couple of our first clients were grass-fed operators, so doing grass-fed dairy in particular. And they were interested in getting trees established in their pastures. I said, well, there's not many people doing this, and I don't have great means of getting these trees established in an actively grazed pasture, but let's try out a couple things. So it was around 2019 and 2020 that we started to experiment with means of getting trees established in pastures.
Oh, very good. Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, the podcast dedicated to sharing the stories of grass-based livestock producers and exploring regenerative practices that improve the land, animals, and our lives. I'm your host, Cal Hardage, and each week we'll dive into the journeys, challenges, and successes of producers like you, learning from their experiences and inspiring each other to grow and graze better. Whether you're a seasoned grazer or just getting started, this is the place for you. Calling all ranchers, if you're looking for a better way to optimize your grazing operation and rev up your bottom line, Noble Research Institute can help. Noble's unique approach to education pairs their own field research with the experience of their ranch managers and advisors to find practical solutions to producers' challenges. Every Noble educational course breaks down the science and principles to help ranchers like you build skills and confidence in regenerative land management, grazing practices, and business management. Noble Research Institute ensures that every insight they share has been tested in real-world conditions, so ranchers get solutions that work, not just theories. Visit noble.org to learn more and browse Noble's educational resources. For 10 seconds about the farm and the podcast, we're going to talk about today's episode with Austin from Trees for Graziers. As you'll find out as you listen to this episode, the information he's giving me for my context, I'm a little bit late. For some of you, it's going to be timely, but if you're south of me, it's going to be too late. So Austin and I, the Grazing Grass and Trees for Graziers are in partnership. Grazing Grass and Trees for Graziers, we are going to partner to release more of these episodes for you. We already have it on the calendar to record later this year to get a late summer episode. And what I'd like from you is, so if you have any questions about Silvopasture that you want answered, send them to me, cal@grazinggrass.com, and Austin and I will discuss those. I'm looking forward to this because Silvopasture is something I've always wanted to do a better job of. And, explore the income potential from having some Silvopasture. But I haven't done a very good job. I'm hoping this partnership with Austin will help me do a better job on my farm. And with that, let's get back to Austin. So you're starting to get to the point you've got a fair number of years to see how that starting of trees and pastures are going. But before we talk about that, why did you go into agroforestry?
Why did I go into agroforestry? I wanted to do something outside. I wanted to do something with my hands. I wanted to do something where I could leave a beneficial legacy and to know that I'm doing something valuable for others, for the planet, for all those things, for wildlife. So that's what brought me into agroforestry. I think agroforestry is a really neat combination and integration of both conservation and agricultural production, right? So you get
Oh, yeah.
both of those in the same package. And that's what intrigues me about it. And you can do it on a real landscape scale where you can create a more productive environment economically, but also a more ecologically diverse, ecologically healthy environment. So that's really, I think, what drew me to agroforestry
Oh, yeah.
specifically.
And to be honest, I'm not familiar with
Hmm.
agroforestry. But when you think about that, is that growing wood or growing forest for harvest for like pine wood or other things along that line?
So agroforestry is a suite of practices. So it
Oh,
encompasses
okay.
forest farming, which is like growing mushrooms and ramps and that kind of stuff in the woods.
Oh, okay.
Um, it also includes alley cropping, so growing trees and tree crops in amongst your row crops like wheat or corn. Silvopasture, which is what we focus on at Trees for Grazers. Riparian buffers, and windbreaks. So that's the suite of
Oh, okay.
practices that fall under the category of agroforestry. And I initially got started in riparian buffers, so streamside forests is what I got started in. There's a lot of pollution here coming out of Lancaster County, going out down into the Chesapeake Bay. So there's a lot of effort to plant trees along streams. And then from there, we migrated over to silvopasture as well, although we still do a lot of stream buffers in addition to that.
So when we think about just on that riparian area,
Hmm.
is that how far from your waterways are you going with trees to provide that buffer?
It depends on the farm, and it also depends on the program that is funding it. Some programs will say we're going to do a minimum of 35 feet from the stream.
Oh, yeah.
Other programs will say, hey, we'll go out to 180 feet or 300 feet. It's,
Oh,
you know, it's a little bit gray how wide the riparian area actually is. In reality, it's the more the better for water quality. The more
right.
forest you can add, the more leaf matter you can add, the more shade you can have for the stream. In our context, the better it is. But you have to balance that out with the needs of the farm as well. Obviously, an area where land goes for $30,000 to $50,000 an acre, you can't be taking out 300 feet alongside the stream.
Right. Yes. So how did you make the leap or start being more aware of grazers? Obviously,
Hmm.
through the land value is one reason. I'm sure you had pushback from farmers not wanting to go very far out there.
Exactly. Yes. Yep. So it's
Yeah.
been a very interesting way to combine the conservation benefits of trees
Mhm.
on the landscape in an area where land is at a premium, like literally at a premium, so that you can get both the conservation value of it and also continue to be using that land productively. So it was about, like I said, it was about 2018, 2019 that some of our clients started to want us to figure out how to integrate trees into their pastures. So it was just, I think, two farmers to start out with.
Oh, yeah.
And but I realized pretty quickly that if we could figure out how to successfully integrate trees into a pasture without a whole bunch of additional work for the landowner, if we could figure that out, the scale of applicability is huge, right? Because there's
Right.
millions and millions of acres out there that are in pasture where folks could use additional trees spread out.
Yeah, I've been talking to my dad. W just we've had some wind of late, a little
Hmm.
bit more than usual. We have a lot of wind anyway, but we noticed in one of the lots up here by the barn, another tree's blown down.
Hmm.
I'm like, we've got to plant some trees. And he told me a while back, we were talking, he says, I think we should build some
Hmm.
structures out in the pastures
Hmm.
with this shade cloth. And of course, I immediately am thinking, why are we trying to do one better than nature? Why don't we just let nature handle that? We get some trees planted out there instead of buying all the products
Yep.
and bring in here to make shade.
Yep. No, the upside of the shade cloth is you can get shade right away. Once you're done with that chore and you created that shading structure, you're done. You've
True.
got
It's
shade.
an immediate thing. Yeah.
But in the long term, the trees will provide a better shade. Livestock tend to prefer to go under trees because not only are they getting shade, but they're also getting cooling because the trees, like through evapotranspiration, they're actually cooling the air underneath. So it's a better shade, and you get all kinds of additional benefits coming from those trees, right? It's just that it takes a while. And that's going to be the theme throughout Silvopasture is there's a lot of value to it, but it takes a while to get there. That's the key thing. If we could plant trees and they're like an annual crop where we get a yield off of them right away in the first year, we would have trees all over throughout our pastures.
Oh, yes. Isn't it that Chinese proverb that says the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the second best time today?
Today, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Was it with those early farmers, was it that they wanted trees out into their grazing areas or their pastures?
Mhm.
Or was it kind of a compromise when you're trying to get this riparian buffer in and they're trying to get the maximum amount of grazing?
Yeah, so the conversation that I had with farmers is very different if we're trying to do a riparian buffer versus a silvopasture. With a buffer, and usually we're partnering with a nonprofit group. Like a nonprofit goes and they're the ones having a conversation with the farmer. They're the ones saying, hey, here's a funding pot that we have access to that we can use to pay for this buffer. But the thing for the farmer is that they're losing production because they can't let their animals in there. So they're losing grazing ground, they're losing cropping ground, whatever it is. And typically in our area, there's the CREP program that will pay the farmer a certain amount, a land rental rate, to take that land out of production and put it into conservation instead. So that's the trade-off for the farmer is you lose productivity, but you gain a rental check or something else that you're going to get out of this. In a silvopasture context, we're looking at working with a farmer and saying, we're going to increase your productivity on your land because of less heat stress, because of being able to drop pods or fruits or whatever it is. And we're also going to get more ecological value here. And hopefully we can find a group that's willing to bring money because of that ecological value. So it's a conservation group or NRCS or whoever it is that's willing to bring money to reduce the cost of investing in those trees for the farmer. So it's a very different conversation. I also don't twist people's arms to do silvopasture. There's enough interest in this that I don't have to try to go out there and convince people. We've found that even though there's really not a whole lot of silvopasture being done in the United States, like hardly any projects annually, that if you can make it simple for folks and say, look, we'll do this for you. We'll go out and we'll find the funding as well. We will do the planting. We will source all the trees. We'll make this as simple as possible for you. There's a whole bunch of people where silvopasture just makes sense for their operation. They've wanted to do this for a long time anyway. They've just never gotten around to it. And I think that's one of the most common things is, look, there's always a million things that need to be done on the farm. And most of the things needed to be done 5 years ago and they're starting to fall apart. So that to-do list is it keeps you hopping without having to put the time and the energy and the money into investing in trees that aren't going to give you any yield for, let's say, 5 years. So that's where if we can come in and we can do it for them, it makes it easy. And there's a whole bunch of people, like the people listening here, that are already on this path of going for grass-fed, regenerative, and they get it. It makes sense to them. Someone who's running a CAFO operation, I'm not going to be talking to them about let's do silvopasture. There are too many steps away from this making sense for them. So really, I'm just talking to folks who who are right there, who get it, and where this would make sense on their farm. So it's typically not hard to convince people to look into silvopasture.
Yeah. I would suspect it not because, as I mentioned earlier to you, silvopasture is brought up a lot in conversations that I hear. For us, we attempted, I guess about 10 years ago, to plant, I don't know, 100 pecan trees.
Okay.
And then we did a very poor job of protecting them and getting them started.
You're not the only one. That's probably the rule rather than the exception for
Well, we got zero
projects.
out of that.
Yeah.
We got some pictures of us actually doing it, but and we've talked since then. Oh, we're going to do that again, and we're going to do a better job. And here we are. I actually think we did that in 17. So here we are 8 years later, and we haven't done anything. We did graft some trees, but if we would have got those, we'd been so far ahead. We need to go ahead and do something again. Try to get on some kind of path.
Yep. I would say that your experience is the rule rather than the exception. We've worked with quite a few farmers who have done some small plantings, and typically they don't work out so well. Planting trees, even in a stream buffer, is challenging enough because you've got the vegetation, you've got deer, you've got voles, rodents, rabbits, all kinds of things, droughts. Like there's all kinds of things that are going to conspire to kill your trees. But then you put them into a grazing situation, and then you add like large ruminants typically to all, and you still have all those other things to deal with. And it's a challenging thing. And we're fortunate enough that we've been able to work with enough farmers and try this numerous times by now. And so by now it's 2025. We've been at this for about 5 years, seriously been at this for about 5 years. And we've kind of figured it out. We kind of have figured out the protection methods, the protocols that one should put in place to where we're getting 90% success rates on our trees.
Oh, yes. With that, you mentioned a whole host of things that's working against you. In our context, we added sheep and goats to the enterprise, to the equation too, which caused us some issues. In fact, last year we went to graft pecan trees thinking we would just go, we've got some native groves that just where they've grown, and we're thinking we need to manage them better. So we go out to graft trees, or we go out to see what trees we have to graft. We'd already decided we probably can do about a dozen trees. We go out there and we run into a problem. We've been running sheep and goats for about 10 years. And what it's done that we had never really paid attention to was we didn't have any young growth to graft. Most everything was getting too old. So last year I tried to save some, and then the cows went and tore up some. But I tried to keep the sheep and goats away from some so I can get them growing. I'm going to have to do a better job about that. So that's probably a discussion we should have as well. But when you talk to farmers and they've tried something little and it just doesn't work, what are the main things that caused it not to work?
Yeah. I think the probably the biggest challenge for folks is protecting the trees from cattle.
Oh, yeah.
And then the protection methods that people use can often lead towards other problems, like trees being choked out by competing vegetation or rodents. And I'll explain. So,
okay.
The standard method, I would say, for keeping cattle off of trees is to fence out a big area. So let's say you've got a row of trees and you have a fence 4 or 5 feet on either side of that row of trees, protecting those trees from the cattle getting in and browsing on those trees. So what you're doing is you're keeping the cattle out, but you are also creating a large area where grass is going to grow up. And so you're losing productivity and you're gaining a chore of weed whacking or brush hogging. But normally it's weed whacking because you can't get in there with a brush hog if it's a permanent or semi-permanent wire that you have up there.
Actually, Austin, I want to stop you right there. Are you spying on me? Because I thought you were in Pennsylvania, but this sounds very familiar to what we've done before.
It's not the first time it's happened. So the grass grows up, and you got to weed whack it. Well, who's going to weed whack that in the middle of the summer? Ain't nobody going to do it. You start out when you plant it and say, I'm going to weed whack that when the time comes. And no one does. And you have these trees, and usually they're smaller trees because
Right.
like there's not a whole lot of money on a farm. So you put the small trees in, and in March, when you plant them and the grass is dormant, it looks great because those trees are sticking up. They're 2 feet
Right,
tall,
you can see them.
and the grass is 6 inches tall, and you're like, there's no way I'm going to lose these trees. And then come August, when the grass is 5 feet tall, you've lost your trees completely. So the trees are getting outcompeted by these forages, and that alone might kill them. But if that's not enough, you're creating a great habitat for rodents. And in our area, voles kill more trees than cattle do. So I don't know if your area has voles. They're like a small mouse that lives in the grasses, and they love to chew on trees, especially during the winter. They love to chew on the bark of trees, and they will kill so many trees, and then they'll laugh at you while they're doing it. So that's our public enemy number one, is voles, for our area at least.
And we are within the range of voles.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with them, so that's where I need to be more observant. But it looks like it heads east to you, west a little ways, the range, west into Colorado, Wyoming, north into the edge of Canada. It also looks like if you go very much south of me, it's not a problem.
Okay.
Based upon this one result from Google.
Okay.
So I could be completely wrong about this.
I've talked to some folks who say like they don't have voles, but a large portion of the country is going to have them, and they're going to be a very significant factor that you don't even think about it because normally you don't see them.
Oh, yeah.
So I would say that's probably the biggest contributor to failure of tree plantings. So I've seen people plant trees outside of their fences, like alongside the fence around the house, around the farm, or whatever it is. And generally people have good success there because they can mow up along it. They don't have cattle to protect it from. And so long as you can keep the vegetation down, the tree has a good chance, especially if you can mulch around it, keep the vegetation down, the tree's going to do well. It's just getting those trees in an active pasture that is challenging when you use the fence out method. And the same would apply for cages as well. So if people use cages to individually protect trees, you're kind of getting the same conditions where a lot of forages are going to grow up inside of that cage and are going to create a great habitat for rodents.
And that's what I was thinking with these trees that I'm trying to protect. My first thought, the first thing I did last spring after I figured out we didn't have any young pecan trees was I identified 2 pastures where I had pecan trees sprouted, and I didn't let the sheep and goats in those areas. The cattle still had access and caused me enough damage. They caused me more damage than I thought. So my thought this year was I was just going to get like a goat panel and make a cage around it. But it doesn't sound like that's a really good solution.
So here's what I would do with cages.
Okay.
I think cages in and of themselves have that issue of forages growing up inside of them. But if you were to mulch the tree really, really heavily, let's say 3-4 inches of mulch, the more the merrier. And then you put the cage around that such that the area inside the cage is all mulched. That's actually going to be great for the tree, I think. Because the mulch is going to conserve moisture, so it's going to be a benefit to the tree. You're not going to get vegetation coming up and competing with the tree in that area. So that's how I would do it, is like you said, a goat panel, a cattle panel, whatever it is, whatever makes sense for the livestock that you're running. But you need the mulch as part of that, or you're just going to get too much competing vegetation going on there with the tree.
So that's a pretty simple way to make a cage more effective, adding that mulch. Is that mulch something you need to go back and reapply 6 months or yearly, or
I don't think so.
often?
No, we typically don't on our plantings. Our protocol when we do our plantings is we put 10 gallons, so 2 5-gallon buckets of wood chip mulch. And this is just straight up wood chips. Don't buy the stuff from the garden center. Just whatever wood chips that you have access to. Typically
You
hardwood.
find them
Hardwood
chipping
is better than
trees down your
softwood.
road. Go grab some.
Exactly. So 10 gallons of wood chips around the base of every tree is what we do. We do it once. It would be better for the tree if we came back and reapplied it, but that one time is the most critical because it's when you first transplant the trees that they're most susceptible to drought in particular, and also to competition from other forages. So we found that in our area, the mulch breaks down to where you have other grasses and stuff coming up through it in a year to 2 years is typically what it is. More along the lines of 2 years typically. And in that time, the tree has a great start and it has its roots pretty well established. So another round would be great. The tree would love it, but it's not nearly as critical as that first round of mulch.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Good to know. Yeah. So just continuing on that path a little bit, what would be a better step than a cage and mulch?
Yes. Yep. So here's our protocol that we've developed is it starts with a 6-foot tall plantra tree shelter. That's what we kind of figured out works for us. And it's worked for everyone that we've worked with too. So let's break that down. The plantra tree shelter, it's a 6-foot tall tube and a 7-foot tall stake. You drive it in a foot and there you go. The stake is a fiberglass stake. So it's an electrical insulator and it has some good flexibility. So the nice thing about it is cattle can rub up on it a little bit and it'll flex. You don't want cattle to rub up on it too much, and that's where the electric fencing comes in. So you protect the tree shelter from cattle with electric fencing. Typically, we're using a combination of polywire and aluminum wire. Two main ways that we do it. One is we'll run a single strand along a row of trees at the height that you would put a paddock division strand. So at knee height or whatever that is. So that's simple, very simple means of protecting the trees and also defining a paddock if you want to do it that way. Other thing that we're doing, and we're doing more and more of this now, is we're doing what's called an overpass, where we are running the polywire at 6 feet high along these row of trees so that livestock can freely move underneath and get through this row of trees. And then what we do is we attach aluminum wire to that polywire up top, and we wrap that around the tree tube. So that way the tree tube itself, the exterior of the tree tube is electrified. So if cattle rub up on it, they'll quickly figure out that they shouldn't anymore.
So that leaves you a more permanent situation than if you're making a paddock and running it along your trees. It allows you to go perpendicular to your trees and multiple day moves.
Exactly.
They're still good, but because you got that semi-permanent or top wire with the aluminum wire.
Yep. It gives the operators much more flexibility of how they run their operation, how they make their paddocks, how big they make their paddocks. So that's why we're doing a lot more of that anymore. I should also say about the height of the tree shelters. So 6 foot is what we recommend for cattle. If you've only got sheep, 5 foot should do. If you got goats, I probably would go 6 foot just because they're ornery.
Yes,
and
they
athletic.
Are. Yeah. Since we're going down this path of getting them started, how long do they stay in that tree shelter? What are you looking at there?
Let's circle back around to that. I need to finish our protocols first. So, so once we have the tree shelter on, we'll want to put a vole guard around the base of the tree. So the tree shelter itself is around 4 inches in diameter, which allows the tree to grow somewhat inside of that tree tube. The downside is it's a really nice place for a vole to hang out, a vole or something like a mouse to hang out inside of there. And so what we do is we put a vole guard around the base of the tree. Basically, it's just a spiral guard that's going to stick pretty close to the tree trunk so that there's no room for a vole to get in there and girdle the tree. They can't access the tree trunk itself. So that's our insurance policy against voles. So just a little spiral guard we've used, a vinyl spiral guard that they often sell for buck rub. That's one product that we've used. Right now we're shifting over to using a mesh, plastic mesh wrap that Plantra makes, and we're just cutting them down to about 8 inches long. So that's what we do around the tree to prevent vole damage.
Is that into the ground, or is that just at surface?
If you can put it into the ground a little bit, that's great. Oftentimes they don't really go into the ground very well.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. What we do about below ground vole activity is when we do maintenance, we will put a vole repellent in there. And usually, so we have a blend of castor oil and blood meal that we put in there. I can't say that we've scientifically tested this. We haven't done a controlled study, but it's a cheap insurance policy. If we're already going around and checking on all these trees in the fall, when voles are about to go into dormancy and they're wanting to find a place to ride out their winter, we drop this combination, and the castor oil specifically is sold commercially for below ground rodents like moles and that kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
So we're banking on the vole guard protecting from above ground girdling, and then the castor oil and blood meal combination deterring from below ground girdling. So as you can see, voles are a real thing. We've had to come up with creative means of keeping them away, but thankfully both of them are really cheap. And then what we do is we will mulch, like I said, 10 gallons worth of wood chip mulch. And the more the merrier. So 10 gallons is just what we have as our company policy for whatever jobs that we're doing. Yeah. If you're a farmer and you have access to a whole bunch of mulch, just layer it on there. The trees will appreciate it. So we'll do that around the base of the tree because there's a tube there. So some folks know to be wary about putting a volcano of mulch up against the tree because we don't want a whole bunch of moisture in contact with the bark, the trunk of the tree. But because there is a tree tube around the tree, you can put a whole big volcano right up against the base of that tree tube and it's perfectly fine. And I figure it just adds, there's more mulch right there around the closest to the tree where it matters the most. So that's how we do the mulch. And that's that in the basis of our protocols that we use on just about all of our plantings. So you're protecting from cattle, you're protecting from deer, you're protecting from voles, and you're protecting from drought and weed competition as well. So all of your bases are covered. You're definitely investing more per tree. There's no way around it. Like what we do as a philosophy for our company is we want a really high success rate. There are folks out there, there's philosophies where you put out a whole bunch of trees and you know that it's a numbers game and just a lot of them won't make it. We try to go the opposite route where we say, I want to plant one tree and I want to get one tree. And I know exactly what I need to do in order to get that tree to survive. So long as I'm starting with a good tree, right, and I provide it everything that it needs, it's going to survive.
I think probably we leaned towards that. We were putting out a whole bunch of trees and thought, well, we hope they'll survive. I much would have rather we did a little bit more proactive then, so we did have them survive. That'd been really good.
Yep.
On the trees, this tube you're putting 6 foot tall.
Yes.
Are you planting saplings or trees that's already that tall, or does that still work if you plant smaller ones? Because I think the pecan trees we got were like 18 inches, 2 foot.
Yep. The standard is to use small trees, like you were saying, 18 inches. They're used all the time in conservation plantings where people are putting 12-inch trees inside of those tubes, and it works perfectly fine. I will say that trees do not grow as well inside of tubes as they do out in the open. They're constrained. They're constricted to that 4 inches of diameter or whatever it is. They will grow taller faster, but that doesn't mean that they're healthier because they're out of balance because they haven't been able to branch out. So some like tree shelter manufacturers will tell you, hey, these trees grow faster inside of a tree tube. They grow taller, but they're significantly out of balance. And by the time that they get out, they're tall and lanky. And then they need a couple of years to get the right ratio of height to girth of that tree.
I struggled with the same thing.
Yeah. So because all things being equal, I would rather my trees grow outside of a tube. But because we're getting these trees established in challenging environments with deer, with cattle, all of those things, that's where the tubes come in so handy. I will say that we are, as a company, moving towards planting taller and taller trees inside of our tree shelters for a couple different reasons. What it comes down to mostly is we can take much better care of a tree in a nursery, and more economically too, than you can in a pasture setting. So in a nursery, we've got 20,000 trees in one small field, right? And we can take very good care of those trees. We can keep all the animals, all the wildlife away from them. We can grow them in such a way that they're growing out in the open. They side branch. They have a good size, good diameter and ratio with their height, so that when we put them in a tree shelter, they're actually much more balanced and they're several years ahead. I figure in a nursery, we can grow a tree much faster than you can in a pasture, just because we can control a lot more of these factors. I think we can get a 2 years head start by planting a tree that's 6 foot tall. And it's going to be more uniform. It's going to give you the results that you want much quicker and more uniformly than if we're planting trees that are 12 inches, 18 inches, whatever it is. And you're putting more money into the tree, but you're saving money on aftercare, and you're getting to your goal, whether that's shade or pods or fruit, much quicker. And I believe that there's a certain point at which you can also save money on the tree shelter. Like if you put out a tree that's 8 foot tall, then you can start to save on the tree shelter, because you probably don't need a stake. You don't need a stake. You can probably get away with not having a tree tube. We have to experiment with this of how exactly we would do it, and it's going to depend on the producer, their context. But there'd be many times where if you put out a 6 foot tall tree or an 8 foot tall tree, you can probably save money on the tree shelter. And so you're breaking even on that additional investment in the tree.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I know anytime you talk to farmers, I know it's with our case, we're trying to do it cheaply and get a lot in. Of course, hindsight's 2020. If we'd gone in with that same amount of money and did a few trees, whether that was even one, and we had one survive, that'd be one more than what we got out of all that work.
Yeah. Or even you take that money that you would have put into 100 trees and you put it into 10 trees or 20 trees, and you save a lot of time, a lot of money on all of that, and you just know that you're going to succeed. I think most people would much rather have a, not quite a guarantee, but a really, really, really high chance that what they're doing is going to succeed, and know that that's going to work, rather than rolling the dice.
Yeah, I agree. When we think about, did you get everything covered on your all's method and what you do there?
We did. Okay. And you were asking about how long to keep those tree shelters on.
Right.
Yeah. So it's ended up being longer than what we had anticipated. So initially we thought it was going to be, say, 2 or 3 years for the stake, and then soon after for the tree tube. What we've now figured is the tree tube we're using as a single use product, or we're figuring it's going to be a single use product. It's probably going to be on for 5 years or so. It all depends on the speed of growth of the tree. So our oldest project now is going into its 6th year. And we have improved our methods significantly since that one. So I think it'll be interesting to see how fast we can grow our trees and how quickly we can remove our tree tubes with projects where we have these more updated protocols. But I'd say figure on like 5 years. If it's all fast growing trees like your black locust or hybrid poplars, those can probably be removed in 2 years, 3 years. The challenge is when you have a row of trees, when you've got some big fast growing trees, and then you have some slower growing trees in there. Let's say a persimmon or an oak or a hickory that's just kind of struggling to get established in its new home. Most of those are taprooted species. So they put a lot of energy into that taproot, and they're very slow to put vertical energy into their vertical growth. So they just take a while longer to grow and get to be the size where you can remove that tree tube. So you might have a case where your hybrid poplar is already 8 inches in diameter, and your persimmon is still only 2 inches in diameter. You still need to protect that, or 1 inch in diameter. And that's another reason for us as a company to move more towards planting taller trees, because I would rather get my persimmons out there as nice tall trees, or my oaks as taller trees, and know that, look, I've just gained 3 years on those, because we're going to get more uniformity, and we're going to get a faster time to when we can remove those tree shelters. Another thing that I caution folks about is to don't take the stakes out too early. I made that mistake where I was trying to reuse fiberglass stakes because they're about half the cost of the tree shelter. And I went through it during the winter, and I took off all of the fiberglass stakes from the trees that I thought were big enough to remove those stakes. And then when the spring came and the trees leafed out, those leaves were additional weights high up on the tree. And they were also little tiny sails where when the wind caught them, that pushed them all, and they're all moving and they all leaned in the same direction. So I had to come back and replace hundreds of these stakes and set these trees back up. And so I've tried not to make that mistake since then, and waited until the tree is definitely large enough. It's a very narrow window between when the tree is large enough to stand up on its own without the stake, and when it's big enough to swallow the stake and just encircle it with its roots.
Oh, yes.
So that is a challenging thing. We've messed around with a couple different methods of getting the leverage that you need to yank that stake up from an encircled root. We'll have to do a video on that one.
Yes, yeah. At Redmond, we know that you thrive when your animals do. That's why it's essential to fill the gaps in your herd's nutrition with the minerals that they need. Made by nature, our ancient mineral salt and conditioner clay are the catalyst in optimizing the nutrients your animals get from their forage. Unaltered and unrefined, our minerals have the natural balance and proportion that your animals prefer. This gives your herd the ability to naturally regulate their mineral consumption as they graze. Our minerals won't just help you improve the health of your animals, but will also help you naturally build soil fertility so you can grow more nutrient-dense pasture year after year. Nourish your animals, your soil, and your life with Redmond. Learn more at redmondagriculture.com. When you think about a tree that's big enough to survive without the tree shelter and stake, are you looking at, you want a certain diameter to determine that?
Yes. Yeah. So on the stake, really what we want is we just want the tree to stand up on its own, because when they come out of that tube, like we were saying earlier, they're very lanky and they're top heavy. So they're liable to lean over really hard. On the tube, we want to protect that tree from browse, right? We want to protect it from rubbing. We want to protect it from stripping. So cattle coming through and stripping off the bark can be very dangerous to young trees that we just spent 3 years getting them established. I don't want to take the tube off too early and have young stock come through and strip the bark off. I've seen it happen more than I would like to. So what we do now is we open up that tree tube. So we slice it down the middle, and we open it up so that the tree can breathe, the bark can breathe, we can get more air in there, and we can harden off that bark before we take the tree tube off. So we're going to leave it on for another couple of years, even after we've cut it down the middle and we've opened it up, but we still keep it attached around the tree. And then we just leave it in place. There's really not any downside to leaving it in place if it's loose. We have found that if the tree is growing such that it's starting to push out the tube, and then there's a spot at the base of the tree where the tube is, and it's right in contact with the trunk. And if you get leaves or debris and water in there, it can start to rot. We've found that in particular with black locust and some with honey locust as well. Some of our tree species don't seem to have too much issue with it, like a hybrid willow, a hybrid poplar, probably because they're used to very wet, high organic matter situations anyway. But the locust, the black locust and the honey locust, they were showing more rot at the base in those contexts. So what we did was we're going to split up the bottom of that tree tube so that it can breathe and that debris and the water can escape. Again, one more reason that we're looking to plant taller trees so that we don't have that issue. It's not the biggest issue. It can very well be prevented. It just takes the right care. And that's why for our projects, we send out a crew twice a year, every year for the first 4 years, to do maintenance, to do preventative maintenance, like stuff like that on trees, so that we make sure that we get the highest level of success for our clients.
Very good. Very interesting, very valuable to know this information if you're starting your trees. If you've got some trees you're getting ready to start, when should you be planting them?
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's the end of the question. I actually was going on with it, but that's actually all I need to ask right there. When should you be planting them?
When should you be planting them? So the best time to plant a tree is when the trees are dormant and the ground is not frozen. So typically, trees will go dormant around November, December. It depends on where in the country you are. And for us, the ground rarely freezes during the winter. This winter was an exception. We had like 2 solid months of ground being frozen, which is an anomaly for us. But typically we can plant pretty much through the winter. So it depends on where you're at in the country. Some nurseries, like there's one nursery that we're buying from that they just started to dig, and we're at the end of March right now as we're recording this. Whereas other nurseries down in Georgia, they had their stuff dug a long time ago. So a lot of it depends on where you're sourcing your stuff from. It can be a little bit challenging to coordinate the purchase and the arrival of trees, depending on where you are in the country and where you're sourcing your trees from. That can be a little bit of a headache at times.
If you're not able to do it during that optimal time, is there much drawback to doing it at a different time?
Don't do it during the summer. No, you deal with more drought, more hot weather. A tree doesn't want to come from being refrigerated, which if you're going to get a bare root tree a little bit late, it's going to be in refrigeration probably from the company that you get it from. And then it's going to go into, you don't want it to go into 90 degrees and sunny for weeks on end, right?
Oh, yeah.
You don't want to stress it out like that. So typically we just say, for bare root trees, stick within that season where the tree is dormant and the ground isn't frozen and you're in your mild weather. So nice.
Okay.
It can get down to freezing. That's not a problem. But then you don't want it to get super hot and dry and sunny. Like those are the things that dry out trees much faster. You can extend your season with potted trees. The challenge is that they're more expensive. They're harder to ship. So if you have certain particular things that you want, it's oftentimes harder to get those. So typically for our silvopasture plantings, we're really just using a combination of bare root trees and live stakes. And live stakes are dormant cuttings of willows or poplars or the couple other species where this works, where you can put a stick in the ground and it'll make its own roots. I wish every tree did that, but most trees don't. There's a couple trees that work well in a silvopasture, and it does quite nicely.
Just on that, do bodark or Osage orange hedge apple, will they do that? Or are you familiar with them?
I don't believe that they will. I am familiar with them. I think primarily you're going to be establishing those from seed. We have a grafted variety that we're just messing around with. We don't have it for sale yet. It's called a white shield. And that's one that I would be interested in clonally propagating more. It's a thornless hedge apple Osage. And so you kind of get the best of really, really hard rot resistant wood, and you don't have to deal with the thorns.
Oh, yes. For me, the reason I bring them up, I find those trees very fascinating, and I always think I'm going to try and cut some of the younger branches off because they just shoot up so many and see if they can root, but I just never have yet.
I mean, try it. Now is probably the right time to try it, but I wouldn't hold my breath on Osage.
Okay. Yeah. With getting your trees into the ground, I know in regenerative, we're moving away from chemicals. We're moving away from bringing fertilizer in. Are you doing any chemicals or fertilizers with the trees to help them establish themselves?
We are not. Most of our clients are organic, whether they are certified organic or they're just using organic practices. We don't really, other than for sites that are not organic, not certified, sometimes we'll use a root dip, which has a polymer in it. That it just helps put more moisture right around the roots for when the tree is first getting established. Other than that, no, it's very, very simple. We don't recommend fertilizing trees initially. Just let them get established. Make sure that they have plenty of moisture. Make sure the wood chips are establishing more of that mycorrhizal fungal soil biology right around there. So that helps the trees establish as well. So just make sure that the trees are well taken care of that way, and don't try to push them with fertilizers right out of the gate.
Oh, very good. The other thing that seems to be, or big thing I blame the trees I plant in my yard on why they're not successful, and that is water. We get dry. So on these young trees, how much water should they be getting? And at what point do we step in and provide water to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend so much on species and context. So a willow is going to want a whole lot more water than a honey locust or a mesquite. In our context here in southeastern Pennsylvania, we're fortunate enough that we don't have a lot of droughts. I say that even though we've had drought the last couple of years during kind of critical times during the spring and during the summer and the fall. We've had some really long stretches for us of drought. Typically, we don't water. We don't set up irrigation. Most farms around here are not really set up for irrigation, especially grazing operations.
Right.
So we don't irrigate. Occasionally, we will do some supplemental watering with a tank on the back of a side-by-side or something like that. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of hassle to do that. So typically we don't. Mulching is your best watering.
The best way.
The best watering that you can do is mulching. The challenge there is if you plant when the ground is dry and it stays dry, your mulch isn't going to do anything for you then because there's no moisture for it to conserve in the soil. So that's, I think, the main context where I would water those trees after I plant them and then mulch it really good so that you conserve that moisture as much as possible, and then do a rain dance.
Oh, yes. Now, one thing I know, going to Tulsa, we cross the Fergus River, and there's lots of pecan trees around the Fergus River. And when they plant them, or this one orchard I see a whole bunch, they have buckets out there at the base of each tree.
Yeah.
Is that, for us who experience drought a little bit more, is that something we should be looking at? Or do you think it's going to be the mulching and we just monitor that. We can get by with just a little supplement.
You can probably still get by with just a little bit of a supplement, but the
Oh,
more
okay.
that you can provide, the merrier. So if it makes economic sense for you and you have the right setup to do a bucket with a little hole in the bottom, I think that's a great option. In our context, we've been able to get by with not a whole lot.
Oh, yeah.
In yours, I would say you're going to be drier. You're going to, on the whole, need to provide a little bit more care for those trees, particularly in the moisture category. So I'd be particularly thoughtful about when I plant and what I'm doing to conserve moisture. So you might want to do 20 gallons of wood chips just as an extra
Oh,
precaution.
yes.
And you might say, I'm going to plant my trees in December. I'm assuming that you don't really have a whole lot of ground freezing.
We do not. If it occurs, we're all hibernating. We usually don't get too much of that.
So if you can get trees from a nursery in December and plant them during the winter time when they have plenty of time to get themselves settled in right nicely, they don't need any moisture during the winter, right? Because they're not transpiring during the winter. You've got plenty of time to get your mulch settled in right, capture all of that moisture that's going to fall, anything that's going to fall during the winter, you're capturing. And then it's in a really good space when you're going into the growing season. Whereas if you're pushing it and you wanted to get things planted in April and things are already starting to warm up and maybe you have a dry spell and the soil isn't all that, doesn't have much moisture in it, and you put your trees in and there's not a lot of moisture in there, you're just setting yourself up for more work. You can still do it
yeah.
if you provide the water, but providing water is a real chore.
So, Austin, what I'm hearing is, like I told you earlier, I think about getting you on the podcast too late. I should have had you on back November and had this, and then I'd been gun-ho, got some trees in the ground. Yeah.
Yep. It is getting pretty late right now for you to do
Yes.
a tree planting yet this year. Yep.
The other thing on that moisture and needs, is that something, if we get into a drought, to worry about it the first year? Is the second year the tree going to be okay without us being really concerned about it, or do we still need to be pretty concerned?
The second year, the tree is going to be much better established, especially, and in your context where you are drier, the upside of that is your mulch is probably going to stay in good condition longer because there's just not as much moisture to break it down. So your mulch is probably going to continue to provide that additional moisture right around the base of the tree where it needs it the most into that second year, potentially even into the third year in your context.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, very good.
But it really is that first growing season that's the most critical.
Yeah. Hey, Austin, I'm trying to think as I'm run through planting trees in my mind, trying to think, is there anything I missed? And I'm sure there is, but in my mind, I'm not thinking of anything right now. Can you think of something I should have asked that I didn't?
I think we definitely hit the key things. So the protection from livestock, the protection from drought and loss of moisture, from voles, the time frame to take the tree shelters off. And that really is something that we're still messing around with. We also talked about kind of alternatives where I think cages would be a solid option if you provide a lot of mulch, with that caveat. And like just a cattle panel and 2 T-posts seems like a good way to go. It is expensive. Like material wise,
Oh,
it
yeah, it
is
would.
probably going to run you $50. Whereas in
Yes.
the tree shelters, even though they might run $10, they start to look really, really affordable when you start to compare them to cattle panels. Although the nice thing about cattle panels is you can reuse them indefinitely. It's a very, very simple thing to do.
Yeah, and to be honest, I plan on going out there and identifying a few saplings that are coming up and doing the cattle panels. So I'm glad or goat panels, with the mulch, I'll have to add that factor.
Yep.
But it's because I have the panels here. It's
Yep.
no cost.
Yep.
It's just labor for me.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
but I can fully see if you're going out and buying them, maybe you should be looking at the tubes.
Well, and the other thing is that the tubes work really nicely in a context where you're planting, maybe it's 20 trees, 40 trees per acre.
Oh, yeah.
if you're only going to do a couple trees per acre, it's hard to span that long of a distance with your electric fencing, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's where cattle panels make more sense, maybe some way of protecting trees individually so that you can, and if you're only doing a couple trees per acre, the cost doesn't add up near as quickly either.
True. Yeah.
And that's a great way to start for folks. It's a very simple, low risk means of starting with planting trees in your pasture with material that a lot of farmers have on hand already.
Yeah. And we like to reuse the stuff out of our junk pile.
There we go. It justifies having a junk pile, right?
Right, right. Are you truly a farmer if you don't have a junk pile?
Yep.
That's maybe the discussion. Austin, it's time that we move on to our famous 4 questions.
Sounds
Same
good.
4 questions we ask of all of our guests.
Mm-hmm.
Our first question, what is your favorite grazing grass related book or resource? And I know we're looking at this through the context of Silvopasture.
Yep.
And I'm guessing it has not changed from 4 years ago, but we'll find out.
Probably has not. It is still tree crops. So tree crops.
It has not.
Yep. The book written back in the 1920s. It is still my favorite go-to book in order to see how tree crops were used across the country and across the world back in the early part of the 1900s. It's still an inspirational book for me.
Very good. And, after we recorded the episode 4 years ago, I went out and bought that book. So I believe it should be on my shelf and maybe on a different shelf. I did go through and read it. It's very interesting.
Yep.
And I really got gun-ho for a while, but I didn't get anything done. So
maybe the second time it'll be.
Maybe the second time will help.
Although we should reschedule another episode to go out in November. We'll record one in November so that you get all excited to do your tree planting then rather than right now when we're going into summer.
Exactly. Our second question, what's your favorite tool for the farm?
I think 4 years ago, I probably said a planter tree shelter, and that's still probably the best tool that I have, other than talking about trees themselves. And we didn't talk at all about trees or genetics or anything like that. There's a lot of stuff to discuss there. That would be its whole own podcast series. But as far as a tool, that 6 foot tall planter tree shelter with a plastic tube and the fiberglass stake, very, very useful for getting trees established in a pasture.
Very good. And what would you tell someone just getting started?
Start small and start now. So make your mistakes on a small scale, and you will make mistakes, and you'll figure out what works on your farm. It's often easier to go out and do that with 10 trees and see what works, see what doesn't work. Make your mistakes in an inexpensive way rather than going out and planting 100 or 1,000 trees at once, right? The costs tend to add up with every zero that you put in at the end of that.
Yes.
And then go from there. And the sooner that you can get started, the sooner that you're going to start to get some feedback on what works and what doesn't. And then you can use that and integrate that feedback into the next rounds.
Yeah, very good. Excellent advice there. I love that simplicity of start small, start now. Yeah. Need a shirt says start small.
That'd be great. Now. Actually, we should start selling that in our merch shop that we don't have yet.
Yes. Yeah. There you go. Our fourth question, where can others find out more about you?
At our website, which is treesforgraziers.com. We have articles, we have tree shelters, we have trees when those are in season. All kinds of resources available on our website. We really lean hard into the education side of Silvopasture because there's just so much to be learned about it and so little information available out there. So there's just a ton of resources.
Very good. And we have one final question that I didn't warn you about. Do you have a question for me?
Do I have a question for you? Let's see here. I'm curious, do you see honey locusts in your area of Oklahoma?
Yes, and everyone hates them.
Okay. I mean, it's valid. I understand why.
I know from our first episode we recorded, you were talking about the nutritional qualities of honey locust pods, and tree crops talk about that as well.
Yep.
So I got some land lease that's just it actually connects to Dad. And the coal company had reclaimed this land and put in a whole bunch of honey locusts.
Okay.
And I was excited for that. But when I gained access to the land, someone had sprayed them all.
Oh, really? Okay.
Now they only sprayed the ones that got put in. There's a whole bunch that's grown volunteering the parts that they didn't dig or reclaim, and actually those need thinned some. But I do have honey locusts.
Yeah. Okay. For better or worse, right?
For better or worse, yeah. There's negatives and positives there.
And that's where the genetics are so important for a honey locust. And that's the whole other conversation that we could get into about the work that we're doing on that side of things. But I'm curious how far one can push the boundaries of honey locust, because I know of a cultivar that was discovered way up north in New York State. I know I've been sent trees, or I've been sent pods from up in Minnesota, and in the book Tree Crops, it was in another old resource that I read, where they were seeing honey locust trees out in Colorado, actually by the Garden of the Gods.
Oh, yeah.
So very, very dry, very arid areas. So it's a pretty amazing area that they can cover.
I pulled up from USDA Forest Service. They show honey locusts being fully within the eastern half of Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas. But Colorado's west of there. And of course, as we introduce things, the range grows. And I'm not sure how often these maps are updated.
Yep. I know of trees well outside of the boundaries of maps that I've seen.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Imagine so.
Yep.
Because they're very easy to grow here.
Yep, they grow well. They are definitely an early succession species, a pioneering species. They can take a lot of drought. I've seen honey locusts in very, very droughty, dry areas, but then also seen them growing out of a lake, like completely inundated, and it was growing out of a lake.
I don't think I haven't seen any growing with really wet feet.
Okay.
Most of it's drier area, but I mean, that doesn't mean they don't. I just haven't seen it. In those spots that I have a little bit of water standing, typically I have willows to take over there.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Austin, really appreciate you coming back on the podcast.
You bet.
It's been too long since you were on here, so let's not go so long next time.
Okay. Well, I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you for having me again, Cal.
Thank you, Austin. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Grazing Grass Podcast, where we bring you stories and insights into grass-based livestock production. If you're new here, we've got something just for you. Our new listener resource guide is packed with everything you need to get started on your listening journey with the Grazing Grass Podcast. It gives you more information about the podcast, about myself, and next steps. You can grab your free copy at grazinggrass.com/guide. Don't miss out. And hey, do you have a grazing story to share? We're always looking for passionate producers to feature on the show. Whether you're just starting out or have years of experience, your story matters. Head over to grazinggrass.com/guest to learn more and apply to be a guest. We'd love to share your journey with our growing community of grazers. Until next time, keep on grazing grass.